So in today's video, we're focusing on the properties of exponents and how to simplify using the product rule. And I have two very helpful tips to help you guys do that. So what we need to know is when we're working with the product rule, all it's saying is that we need to add our exponents. So in a problem like this, x to the third times x to the fifth, our answer is just going to be x to the eighth after adding both of our exponents. But typically with these problems, we're going to have numbers in front of the variables. So when we have something like this problem down here that I'm writing now, what we have to remember are these two simple rules that I wrote out. So one, we're going to multiply the coefficients. So those numbers in front of the variables, we're going to multiply that first. So in this problem here, after we multiply, we would have negative 36. And then when we talk about the like bases, we're just talking about the same variables. So when we write this out, we have x to the fourth times x to the fourth. So if we just add that up, that's going to give us x to the eighth power. So we could drop that down next to it. And then we could do the same thing for the y. So that's what we mean when we talk about like bases. We're talking about the same variable. And we'll have y to the 11th. And let's just write that out here as well so we know where we got that answer from. But let's say we have a problem and we're dealing with negative exponents. Does that change the answer at all? And the answer is no. The only way it's going to change our answer is if we get an answer where our final exponent is negative. And this is what I mean. So let's look at this problem here. All right. So if we look at this problem here, first thing we need to identify is just what coefficients are we actually going to multiply together? So we have negative 2, and we look in the middle term, x times y to the negative 1. We just need to know there's just a coefficient of 1. So we don't have to put that 1. And then in our last term, we have 3. So we're going to set this to the side, and we're going to multiply negative 2 and 3 to get negative 6. So now let's move over to our next variable, or should I say the next term, the variable x. So when we look at x, we see that our first two x's, there's no exponent next to it. So what do we do? So what we should know is, and let's just draw an arrow out here, is that they just have an exponent of 1. So when we're multiplying these x's, just remember that it has an exponent of 1. That's the number that we're going to be adding, all right? So when we set our x's up, we're going to get x to the fifth power. So let's go ahead and write that down. Oops, let's go back and change the color. And then now the tricky thing is the y, we have a negative y. So what are we going to do now? And the answer to that question is we're going to do the same thing. So we have y to the first power, right? Don't have an exponent over it. We know it's 1. Then we have y to the negative 1 times y squared. So if we look, right, we know that when we add, doesn't necessarily, the order doesn't really matter. We're going to get the same answer, right? So once we add these all together, negative 1 plus positive 1 plus 2, we're going to get a final answer of y to the second power because that's what's left over. So when we look at this, our final answer would be negative 6 x to the fifth power y squared. But one of the very helpful tips, and one thing that we sometimes get confused, is when they throw parentheses into the problem. So if we look at our last problem, we have 5m, and then we're going to put these in parentheses. What they try to do is confuse us with the power of a product. This is when we multiply exponents. So what we have to understand with this problem is if there isn't an exponent outside of the parentheses, that means that we're going to still add our exponents. So when we look at a problem like this, nothing has changed. We're still going to follow the same product rule. The parentheses don't change anything at all. So when we go back now, we're going to follow the same two tips. We're going to start off by multiplying our coefficients first, and we're going to get an answer of 30. All right, because there's no coefficient in front of n to the fourth power. We should already know it's just 1. It's not going to change the answer at all. So now we go over to our m variable, and we have m to the first power. Let's just take this right here. We have m to the first power times m squared. So when we simplify this, we're going to get m to the third power. And then now we have to not forget to go back and do the same thing for n. So when we look at n, right, there is no exponent over this n. Don't forget, it's just 1. So we have n to the first power times n to the fourth power, and we'll get n to the fifth power. So when we simplify this final answer, we're going to get 30m to the third n to the fifth power. So when we're talking about the product rule, guys, just remember, we're adding our exponents, and we're going to do that by multiplying the coefficients first, then adding our exponents. Check out our next video when we talk about the power of a product property, and this is when we actually multiply the exponents, and we'll talk about the difference in that video as well. Thank you guys for joining us today. This is Algebra 1 with Mr. Peters.